Good morning, Hope College. You guys look great. Love to see a full chapel. Our scripture this morning, when it comes up, is from the book of Proverbs. And we read, "The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous run into it and are safe. The wealth of the rich is their strong city. In their imagination, it is like a high wall." You know, that text came to mind yesterday. Yesterday was the 15th anniversary of the tragedy of 9/11. And for many of us who lived through that time, and for those of you who may not have remembered it well but have seen the images of that day replayed many times, one of the most memorable and heartbreaking images is that of literally hundreds of firefighters and emergency response personnel running into the towers as they were burning. Even as thousands of people were streaming out of the towers, they were going in. And they imagined, rightly I think, based on the information they had, that those towers would continue to stand. Well, we all know that that wasn't the case. And in fact, over 400 firefighters, police officers, and paramedics died as the towers collapsed. They had run in to help others, and they did not survive. And it was a poignant moment for all of us in recognizing the heroism of those who ran toward danger and not away from it. Well, with that image in mind, and with the reminder in the book of Proverbs that really the strength of the Lord is our strong tower, that those things that we make for ourselves, those things that we create to try to give ourselves a sense of security, often fail in the times that we rely on them most. It's really a stark reminder. I think about the great hymn that Martin Luther wrote about 500 years ago now, "A mighty fortress is my God, a bulwark never failing." A reminder that God is our fortress. God is the place that we turn, the place that we go for strength when we need it. Well, today is September 12th, and for those who remember September 12th, it was an unusual day. It was an eerie day, a day of silence, of fear, of bewilderment and mourning, and an unprecedented time, the Federal Aviation Administration grounded all flights over North America. 4,000 flights were grounded. No airplanes flew. The skies were empty, and it was, in a very strange way, silent, with no planes flying overhead. And on that day, people were trying to decide, what do we do? Where do we turn? What is the appropriate response to a tragedy that was so vivid and unexpected and of such magnitude? And early that morning, I had a phone call, and the call was from a woman who was the executive assistant to the CEO of one of the largest telecommunication companies in the world. And she asked if I was available to speak with the CEO, who wanted to get me on the line. And he came on the line. I knew him, and he said, "We're calling an all-employee meeting for tomorrow by teleconference." This is a company with tens of thousands of employees, $40 billion in revenue. And he said, "Can you recommend a minister who could offer a prayer during our employee meeting?" Well, I could not have been more surprised. This is a public company, New York Stock Exchange company, a company where prayer is not the norm. You would not find somebody praying at a company meeting in a public company very often, and certainly this company was one I knew well, and I was surprised to hear this, and yet a part of me wasn't surprised at all, because it did seem like, for all of us, that prayer was the thing to do in that moment. And so that day they had the teleconference. I had recommended a well-known minister who led a prayer. I don't think that would happen today. It might not have happened a month later, but on that day it seemed the right thing to do. I don't think any of us could have guessed how quickly our whole nation really turned as one to God. There was sort of an unprecedented public outpouring of prayer on September 12th and in the days that followed. People organized prayer meetings in public schools, and no one objected. They organized meetings in government offices to pray, and in businesses of all sizes. People prayed in the streets, and churches opened for prayer at times that they weren't normally open. In fact, on the Sunday following September 11th, church attendance set an all-time record in this country. And in the months that followed, for the rest of the calendar year, Bible sales set an all-time record as well. In a sense, I view this as a pattern that we experience in our lives. We gave ourselves permission at that time to admit that we can't go it alone. That in this life, when we try to go it alone, there are times that we realize that our very best efforts fail and that our only place to turn is to the source of our strength, which is God. And so as I reflect on this, I would just ask us all to think about, when have we experienced the September 12th in our own lives? Think about those moments after the fact in your own life when there's been a tragedy, there's been a great disappointment, a time of failure, a time when maybe the things that you counted on or the people that you counted on let you down in a profound way. And it's September 12th for you. And in those times, can you recall those moments where you turned to God? You felt that there was nowhere else to turn, and turning to God seemed to be the place that you could go to find the security and the reassurance that you needed. And yet, how quickly, how easily do we lose sight of that? How soon do we move on? You know, it wasn't too long after September 12th, in the weeks and months that followed, that it was back to business as usual for that telecommunication company and for all of us. We got on about our daily lives and fell back into that trap that we do of assuming that we had it all together and that we were perfectly secure in the ways that we had tried to craft the world to suit ourselves. And in that process, we sort of set God aside again, don't we, until that time of another great challenge or crisis where we need to turn to God for help. You know, we also read in the book of Proverbs in 3:5, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not depend on your own understanding. In Jeremiah 17:7, blessed is the person who trusts the Lord. The Lord will be his confidence. It's a great message that our confidence, which sometimes is so fragile and fails so easily, is really the confidence that we have in knowing that it's God on whom we depend, and it's God on whom we can rest our self-assurance, because it's God who created us, loves us, and knows us better than we know ourselves. And then in Psalm 62, in verse 8, trust in him at all times, you people. Pour out your hearts to him, for God is our refuge. God is our refuge, a bulwark never failing. Trust in him at all times. You get the notion there that it's not just in the time of crisis, not just in the time when we feel the greatest need for God, but we ought to learn to trust in God at all times in our lives. Well, on September 12th, in the nation's newspapers, there were a number of vivid and graphic photographs that appeared, but one in particular captured the imagination of people looking at the newspaper, and in fact made the cover of a monthly magazine a little bit later. And it was an image of a man who had emerged from the second tower just before it collapsed. And he was covered with debris. He was in tattered clothing, and he was still clutching his briefcase as he walked out of that place. And there is the image of him now, if you can see it. And no one knew who he was at first, but a reporter who was curious about this picture that had made its way onto the front pages tracked him down and found out who he was and asked him about this. And the man said that he was confronted as he walked out of the debris by an emergency worker. And the emergency worker said to him, "Sir, you're in shock. Let me help you." And the man, still clutching his briefcase, pulled himself up to his full height, and he said, "I am not in shock. For the first time in my life, I am fully cognizant of what really matters." And I read an update on that as people were writing about 9/11 15 years later, and this man, whose name is Ed, actually went on to a life of service. He left his business career and went on to work in an organization that helps people because he had found that moment of clarity about what really matters, and he held on to it well beyond 9/11. So my challenge to us today is pretty simple, and it's just that I think we all need to work on remaining fully cognizant of what really matters. And what really matters is that our God is a loving God, is a God who can, in fact, provide us with that safe place that we need, on whom we can depend in good times and bad. And that if we remain focused on that, if we remain cognizant of that, if we trust in the Lord at all times, then we're in a much better place than if we put God on the shelf only until those moments where we find ourselves in desperate need and we turn and try to find where God is for that reassurance that we just need for the moment. I want to just encourage all of us to place our confidence in the one strong tower, the tower that is God, and to remember that we're invited into the security and the safety of a mighty fortress that is our God. And that, my friends, is a great blessing. Godspeed. Have a wonderful day. We're dismissed.